Hi guys, today's lesson is going to focus on population density and distribution in the Middle East. As always, what I'd like to do is, I'd like to watch this video and there will be opportunities for you to pause it and answer some small questions. What I would then like to do is at the end there are 3 review questions. I'd like to upload your answers to these questions at the end of the video. So, a bit of a recap. In the last lesson we were looking at something called a climate zone of the Middle East. And those climate zones were mainly the desert biome. We also had that steppe, which was the grasslands. We had mountainous regions. And we had that Mediterranean climate as well. So the idea being the Middle East is not all desert. It does have a variety of different climates within it. Today, we're going to be looking at what impact that has on population. So, for example, population distribution is the way in which people are spread across a given area. And essentially, what that means is, say I have 2 cities and there are 100 people, and I put 50 people in each city, the population distribution is even. If I have 2 cities and I put 60 people in one and 40 people in the other, my population distribution is uneven because more people live in one city than in another city. And the other thing we need to look at as well is this word called population density. Now you should have looked at this in year 8 at some point, but essentially areas can be split into 2 different categories. We've got densely populated areas and we've got sparsely populated areas. So a densely populated area is an area of land that has a lot of people living in it per square kilometre. So if you look at Hong Kong here, with all those skyscrapers, all those apartment buildings, there are a lot of people crammed into a small surface area of that location. For the sparsely populated region, that is an area with very few people living in it. Okay? And that's going to be really important to look at when we look at the Middle East, because some areas of the Middle East are very, very densely populated, and some areas of the Middle East are very, very sparsely populated. And to kind of help you with that definition a little bit, so this box on the left, this is an area which has a sparsely populated distribution, and this area on the right is an area that has a very densely populated distribution. And again, if you look at the little box on the right, you can see that those people are kind of crammed in together, so it's densely populated, whereas on the left, they're quite spacious. If you think about where you live, if you live in like a cul-de-sac location, you might think that the population is relatively densely populated where you live, because there's houses to the left of you, right of you, opposite you. Whereas if you lived in a rural area, you lived in the countryside, you might have neighbours, but they might be 200, 300 metres away, rather than being close together. And that's what this is really getting at. Now, in the Middle East, population distribution and density is very, very varied. On this map here, you can see this shows the distribution of density in the Middle East. So the areas in red are where there's high population density, and the areas of the sort of beigey colour there are the areas of very low population density. So I'd like you to pause the video, and there are 3 questions on the right. I want to name 2 cities or places that have a high population density, 2 areas which have a low population density, and are there any patterns on there? Okay, so have a go at that now, pause the video, and then come back once you've done that. Okay, so 2 cities with a high population density, I'd be looking at places like Cairo and Giza, I'd be looking at Tehran, I'd be looking at Izmir in Turkey, I'd be maybe looking at Ankara and Baku as well. Areas with low population density, well, you could have this area of the Middle East here. You could arguably have places like Doha, Abu Dhabi even. And are there any patterns? Well, generally, if you look at it, the areas of the high population density are near water resources. So obviously in Egypt here is along the River Nile. We've got Tehran, Tabriz, Izmir, Istanbul, Baku, all next to a water resource. And that should make complete sense. There are some that don't fit the pattern, so Baghdad doesn't in a way, but still, there are 2 major rivers running through that area. And obviously without those rivers, we would have a fairly large problem indeed. So again, this idea that the Middle East is just desert is a little bit obsolete. Yes, there are some places like here in the Saharan desert here, the Arabian desert, the pyramids of Giza, which are very much those deserty regions. But this is Tabriz here, it's like a desert to me. This is a nice area in Egypt that looks very, very beautiful indeed. And this is Izmir in Turkey, which has a lot of water resources and doesn't at all look like an area that is just desert. I think that's a misconception we need to get our heads around and understand that even though large parts would look like this, there are very different climate zones, and therefore the settlements within those regions are very, very different as well. So the Middle East has a varying population distribution. This is kind of our desert image, and this on here is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. And you can see that the population distribution there is very, very varied. And we need to look at exactly why that is the case. So we're going to look at three factors. They are the climate, the relief, and the water access. Okay, so climate, relief, and water access. All those three things have determined where people live in the Middle East, and they've determined it in the whole world. The same three factors would have impacted us in the UK as well at some point in our timeline. So, this is the first one, and it's looking at climate. So which areas would you expect to have a low or high population density? Have a pause of the video, have a little look at this here, and see what you think and why. Give it a pause. Okay, so I would go for the green areas being quite high population density. I'd maybe go for the dry climate, which is arid, so this kind of yellowy colour here, being the lower ones. Because obviously if that's the case, if it's dry, there'll be less water, less crops being able to be grown, maybe struggling for water access in the full term. Whereas if you've got sort of a dry and wet season, if you've got colder summers or only a dry winter like we have in Turkey here, there is a good chance that the population density will be a bit higher. Same idea here as well. The second reason is what we're going to look at now. So I've put two cities on the board now, two areas. I put this area of Egypt here, and I put this area of Iran and Iraq over here as well. Pause the video. Which of those two places would have a higher population density and why? Okay, I would certainly go for letter A being the reason, and that's because of this thing called relief. Now, we have already looked at relief when we looked at the Arctic, and relief is the word that refers to the shape of the land. So these little bits here, where they're coloured in slightly pink and look quite raised, they are mountainous regions. Okay, so they're regions of mountains. In fact, this is the Zagros mountain range here. Okay, now over here, because of a lack of shading, we can assume the relief is very, very flat in this area. Settlement building would dictate that it would be very, very, very difficult to start building cities on the sides of mountains. So even though people would live in this area B here, it doesn't mean that people are going to be as densely populated as they would be in location A over here, which should make sense. Arguably, you could also say that if you look at any of the main cities on here, so Ankara, Baku, Baghdad, none of them are in areas of really high relief. They're all close to, but not quite. I'd say Tehran's maybe the only slight anomaly on that one there. And then the final reason is water risk. So this map here shows you the overall water risk and area it could expect to have. The yellow or the beige colour is low risk. The red is extremely high risk. Pause the video. With that knowledge, which of those areas will have the highest population density and why? Okay, hopefully you went with A, And if I overlay that with our original map, you can see that this area here of A is very, very low risk, near river, high density. This area here is at high risk or extremely high risk. And again, very, very low density, very, very difficult to live in that area. And C here is a slight anomaly, because even though it has extremely high risk, it still does have a relatively high population density, but overall it's pretty low as well. So in the Middle East, the population density is driven by this need for water. So that links in with the climate, it links in with relief. So like I said, overall, relief, climate and water access are all a huge determining factor in population density and distribution. Okay, so to finish off a little lesson then, guys, and I think, to be honest with you might have to go back over some of these maps. And here are the 3 questions. The first one is, what is population density? Name one area of the Middle East which has high population density. You're going to have to go back in this video, rewind it, to find this map here. Let's have a look at that. Number 2, explain how climate impacts population distribution and density, and explain how relief impacts population distribution and density. The good thing about these videos is that you can rewind them to listen to my explanation again. That will help you with your answer. But if you're still struggling, as always, feel free to get in touch via the Zoom link that we posted on your On Show My Homework. And once you've uploaded these, I can have a little look through them.